Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the MISO Summer Outlook 2015. I think we're still waiting for a couple folks to kind of log in. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the MISO Summer Outlook 2015. My name is Stanley Tan. I'm an analyst at the MISO team. So I believe everybody is logged in already. So a few logistic things. If you have any questions during the meantime, there's a box where you can type in your questions, and we'll be able to address your questions by the end of the webinar. So along with me today, we've also got our meteorologist, Josh, our other analysts of the team, Jefferson Rhodes. So what we will be covering today, first we'll go over the spring 2015 recap for both the demand and pricing. We will also look at the previous summer 2014 in terms of the actual load and in terms of the actual settle. And afterwards, we'll be kind of going over the summer 2015 demand forecast along with generation changes. We will also be looking at some transmission congestion for the June through August timeframe. Lastly, we will be going over the Rockies Express pipeline reversal, and we will just be wrapping up after that. So first, we'll look at the spring 2015 recap. And we'll have Josh to kind of go over what happened for the previous spring.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So we did have a pretty interesting spring, and meteorologically speaking, during the month of March, we saw pretty variable conditions from one part of the footprint to the other in terms of temperatures. It was a pretty mild March for portions of north and also south. New Orleans was particularly mild during the month of March. However, we actually saw a really cold month farther east, and that included St. Louis, Indianapolis, and Detroit. We did have kind of an amplified jet stream. So from one part of the footprint to the other, we did see some pretty considerable variations. Now, once we moved into April, the West Coast ridge finally broke down, and that allowed above normal temperatures to expand throughout pretty much the entire footprint. April was actually a pretty mild month. Most of the region averaging 2 to 4 degrees above normal, and as a result, we saw a cooling load really become kind of a factor here as we saw a cooling load begin to build in New Orleans, so we saw those above normal temperatures. And then May, we're just wrapping up what we've seen the past 30 days. Overall, it was a pretty mild month across the majority of the footprint. Again, we did see kind of a reconfiguration of the upper level pattern. We had a period of below normal temperatures in the western U.S., and as a result, across the MISO footprint, we did see a bit of a mild month.
Okay, so I'm going to touch on the demand, price, and gas recap for the spring 2015. It's just basically dovetailing into the weather recap that Josh just did. We can see that in the month of March, we sort of had the lingering impacts of heating load across the footprint. We saw a pretty good peak load for March of 96.9 gigawatts there, and we can see that we had some pretty good price action off of that lingering cold weather. Into April, with the temperatures basically moving into neutral territory, demand really pulled back. We saw a very weak peak demand in April there, and very weak sort of pricing activity as well. And then May, as we started to get cooling load rather back into the footprint, we saw the peak demand move back into the 90 gig range. We just set that peak load for the month of May at the end of last week, but prices really didn't react to that. Close to the typical type of load for the very late spring, early summer type season, and we have yet to see any significant upside surprises to demand or prices sort of through the end of the spring here. So looking at specifically the top day-ahead constraints for the spring again here, we can see that the majority of the day-ahead constraints that we saw can be chalked up to the strong wind generation that we saw at times through those 3 months there. I believe almost a good 70 or 80% of the day-ahead constraints had some kind of wind generation component as a driver to them. The number one constraint there, Adams transformer, which we did see strongly at times through the spring season here, with a brief lull in that constraint as the Ronald Lakefield line was out. But when that returned, we saw the return of the Adams transformer congestion, easily the number one spot there for the season. And then the real-time constraints, again, wind was a primary driver here. Again, the Adams is there in the top 10 for the month there. Several other wind constraints, particularly across central region around Reynolds, Goodland, with strong central generation at times through the mid-spring season there, and then a couple of real-time constraints around the major outage around Bunsen Eugene that we saw during the period as well.
Okay, so we'll take a quick look at last summer, and I think the best word to describe last summer, at least for the MISO footprint, is bland. It really, we didn't see a whole lot go on last summer. On average, through the months of June, July, and August, temperatures were near to slightly below normal. From a month-to-month basis, we did see some more significant variations. June was a few degrees above normal on average across the footprint. However, once we headed into July, which is the month where we typically see the hottest temperatures and strong demand, we actually had a very cool month. Temperatures were anywhere from 3 to 6 degrees below normal on average throughout the month of July. And as a result of that, our demand peak was only 114.7 gigs. For reference, summer 2012, I believe that peak was also met in July. That hit 126 gigs. So we obviously had a bit of a pretty cool summer last year, and as a result, our demand was not that impressive. And then heading in the month of August, just wrapping up, we did see kind of a more seasonal month, and demand was actually pretty close to the July peak, 114.5 gigs on August 25th. But again, overall, pretty seasonal summer.
So mirroring the slides that we just talked about for the spring 2015, we'll look at the demand and price action during the summer of 2014. And as Josh said, the summer saw warmer temperatures during June, which then cooled off compared to seasonal averages through July and August. And the demand curves followed sort of a similar pattern. We only saw about a 4 to 5 gigawatt spread between the peaks for the 3 months, which is not what you would anticipate during a regular summer. We'd anticipate a stronger demand peak in July and a little bit weaker of a peak in June. But instead, we've got 110 in June, which is reasonably strong for that time of the month, and drove decent price action during that time. But then as we got into July and August, when we would expect the strengthening demand, we topped out at 114, 115 gigawatts. Price action wasn't particularly there on those strongest days, as those fell short of the typical summer type levels that we would expect for the footprint. So looking here at the top summer 2014 day-ahead constraints, we've divided our list here into MISO Classic and MISO South. And we can see the weighted towards to the western part of the MISO Classic footprint there. We did have a major outage at Burlington, Neota that helped drive some congestion through July there. Getting down into South, there were some interesting constraints. The Greenwood area congestion is an interesting constraint. Helps to see very strong temperatures and demand across the Mississippi area. We've already seen this constraint pop up on some of the stronger demand days already this spring. And we expect to be a risk in the summer this year, similar to what we saw in 2014. And then we have the top summer 2014 real-time constraints here. Again, they mirror very closely what we saw in the day ahead here. Some of the same outage there. The Burlington Neota helped to drive some congestion across the footprint in June, July there. And then across the South, we didn't see the Greenwood that I mentioned in the day ahead as much in the real time, but we did see some outage-driven and demand-driven constraints, particularly across the Nelson transformer. That's an interesting one, and that's an area that we may see some congestion risk again this summer season.
So coming along, we've got the summer 2015 demand forecast, and then Josh will be able to kind of go over some of that just in a little bit.
All right. Okay, so let's take a look at the summer 2015 forecast. So overall, for much of the footprint, we are going for quite a warm summer. We think that the combination of El Nino conditions and a weakening PDO, I'll get a little more in detail this later on in the PowerPoint, but basically the combination of an El Nino and a weakening PDO, these are some of the teleconnections we use. These, historically speaking, have favored a warm summer for the footprint. Now, our analog years, we did have several. These included 1941, 1977, 1980, 1987, and 2005. Our best analog year that we found was 1987, and consequentially, that's very much what our summer forecast looks like. So we do think Central is going to see the best heat this summer. This includes Indianapolis, St. Louis, right near the Mississippi River area. South is going to be a little closer to normal, maybe a degree or so above normal on average near Little Rock. I think New Orleans is going to be a pretty seasonal summer. We're not expecting anything really interesting in New Orleans, but again, I think Central is going to be where the heat is focused. And in terms of precipitation, we're going for below normal rainfall across western portions of the footprint, better rainfall chances farther east across the Ohio Valley. So taking a look at the monthly breakdown, I guess we'll start off with June. Oh, yes. Okay, yeah, PDO. Sorry, we do have a question here. What does the PDO mean? PDO is short for Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Essentially, it is a teleconnection that occurs over long periods of time. So every 10 to 15 years, we'll see these changes in Pacific sea surface temperatures. So the PDO is similar to the El Nino pattern. Again, it has to do with sea surface temperature patterns in the Pacific Ocean. There is a correlation between the two. Typically, if you have an El Nino like we have, you'll usually see a positive PDO. But what's interesting is we're actually seeing a weaken. It's possible we have a negative PDO by the end of the summer, and that's one of the reasons why we are going for a hot forecast. So, excellent question. So I guess getting back to the monthly breakdown, I guess we'll start off with June, and we do think that we're going to see heat increasing in coverage and intensity gradually, mainly across the western portions of the footprint. St. Louis, Des Moines, and Minneapolis, I think these areas are going to start to see the better heat and the better cooling load kicking in during the next 30 days. And just looking at some of our computer models, I do think we're going to see some pretty good heat mid to late month, mainly across western portions of the footprint. July, this is where we're expecting the hottest conditions. We have the majority of the footprint and above normal temperatures, especially St. Louis, Indianapolis, and Des Moines. This is going to be the crux of the strongest heat that we see during the month of July. Then as we head into August, I think we'll see some pretty warm conditions at the front end of the month, maybe the first week or two. we're going to see a pretty hot month, but I do think we're going to see conditions cooling down pretty substantially later in the month of August. So best heat is going to be during July. That's when we're going to see the strongest demand, probably the best volatility, and then we're going to see some front-end warmth in August, and then quickly trending cooler later during the month. All right, so looking at historical weather trends, cooling load typically increases throughout the month of June, reaching a maximum in July before gradually decreasing in August. Above normal temperatures, as I mentioned before, focused across St. Louis and Indianapolis. This should allow for greater than normal cooling degree days. I think we're going to see some pretty strong cooling load, definitely in the month of July. Also, we'll see some pretty impressive cooling load in June and early in August. However, I do think we'll see more seasonal temperatures near the Gulf Coast. I do think that our south cooling load is going to be a little bit closer to normal. But overall, again, we are expecting pretty good demand this summer, peaking in late July, which coincides with the hottest temperature. Okay, so let's talk about some forecast risks. I think this is a very important slide. As many of you probably know, we are the outliers with the summer forecast. We do have a lot of other vendors going considerably cooler, and obviously you're probably wondering why. Well, the main reasoning is that, first of all, we do expect an El Nino. El Nino summers typically are cool. However, when you look at El Nino summers that had El Nino conditions already well developed several months prior, you typically see a much hotter outcome. When you look at summers where El Nino conditions begin to develop in the summer and strengthen through the fall, that's usually a bit of a cooler signal. So what we've noticed is we've had El Nino conditions in place since last fall. They've been pretty strong all the way up to the present. We are going to see a bit of a strengthening pattern here. But overall, the way we classify El Nino, it shows a bit of a hotter signal, at least from what we're looking at. And we also have other factors. As I mentioned before, we have a weakening PDO. You're probably wondering where this falls in the forecast. Well, weakening PDO essentially will allow a trough to form in the southwestern U.S. When you have a trough in the southwest U.S., you get a ridge downstream right across the MISO footprint. So key factor, if the PDO continues to weaken, we should see that trough in the southwestern U.S. We've actually seen that developing in April and May. It's the first time we've seen this upper-level pattern develop in several months. So we do think that's going to be another factor. But, of course, if our forecast does go wrong, the likelihood is that we're going to see a cooler summer. So the risk is definitely there where it's going to be cooler, but we still stand firm with our hot summer forecast. All right, so let's take a quick look at the tropics. The hurricane season typically occurs from mid-August through late September, and this is normally when we would expect impacts along the Gulf Coast. Coming to the 2015 season, we have a couple of different ways to look at how much tropical activity we're going to see. First of all, we're expecting below normal tropical activity. The national NOAA has actually gone with a 70% chance for below normal tropical activity, and that's typically what you see during El Nino summers. El Nino patterns usually result in a lot of wind shear. Wind shear is detrimental to forming hurricanes, and based off an El Nino alone, we do see a below normal risk for hurricanes. There's also this concept known as the return period, which basically says that every so many years we see a landfalling hurricane in the footprint. And for coastal Louisiana, we typically see anywhere from 7 to 13 years. So every 7 to 13 years, we'll see a hurricane in the region. The last landfall we had was back in 2012. That was Hurricane Isaac. And obviously, it's only been 3 years since then. We haven't quite met that return period. So a combination of factors do suggest below normal hurricane season. However, all it takes is one storm to make all the difference.
Coming along, let's look at some of the generation changes for the summer, any retirement, any new generation. Jefferson will be going over that part. So first, we've got the wind. I think Josh will be able to kind of go in more details with this part.
Yeah, sure. Well, wind generation, typically looking June, July, and August, the strongest during the month of June. Overall, it's kind of a similar trend, vaguely similar to what we saw in the spring. We're going to see strongest generation in the front half, June the strongest, and then it's going to gradually weaken through July and into August. On average, though, as we see the green line there is west wind generation, the blue is central. Pretty consistently, we are going to see west generation stronger than central, but the one thing you're going to notice is that west does taper off a little more rapidly from June into July and August. So we're going to start out 50-60% capacity on average for west generation during the month of June, and that's going to drop closer to 30% as we head into July and August. Yep, and then this table is essentially kind of summarizing what I just mentioned. We'll see that generation, both areas are going to see wind generation declining June into July and August, but we are going to see a more rapid decline in
So this slide just highlights a few of the tidbits out of the NERC 2015 Summer Reliability Assessment as it pertains to MISO. The base case summer peak load scenario for their reliability assessment is 127.3 gigawatts, which is 12.3 gigawatts higher than the actual peak demand that we saw last summer. And at those levels, MISO would be expected to have sufficient generation. Their extreme load scenario for this season here would be 133.6 gigawatts, which would be significantly higher than we saw last year and significantly higher than we've seen as recently. And at that point, they would need to look into deploying demand response resources to maintain reliability. Our Genscape peak load expectation would be for something in the range of 123.5 gigawatts, which would come during the month of July, and that would be under the levels of the reliability base case scenario. So we would feel that on the peak demand day, given no exceptional generation outages that are unplanned or anything along those lines, that MISO would be able to meet their reliability for that peak load day and not have to deploy demand response. This peak demand day under our forecast expectation is still about 9 gigawatts stronger than we saw last year. So we'll see how that pans out. And then getting into generation changes for MISO, we're not expecting much in the way of generation changes during the summer 2015 season. We're not seeing any major additions to the generation stack for the summer season. MISO unit retirements not expected to be an issue. We think that, as looking at the retirement schedule, that will be an increasing pressure to retire coal-fired generation, perhaps during this outage season, upcoming outage season, late 2015, and then certainly into 2016, we'll be taking an even closer look at this. On the other hand, PJM, the neighbor to the east here, has retired several units already this year. They retired several units in the spring of this year, particularly along Lake Erie. And there's one particular constraint that we saw at times with flows from Michigan into Ohio, and that's the Monroe Bay Shore. So there would certainly be something that we're going to keep an eye on for stronger load days through the summer season, given those retirements. And then further retirements are expected in PJM, particularly some units in Western Ohio are concerning to the MISO footprint, in that they may drive potential market-to-market congestion across the MISO PJM seam on stronger load days. And recently, the PJM desk did quite a nice blog entry on the retirements as they concern their footprint, and that blog is available out there for anybody to take a look at that wants more detail on that. And then I just wanted to highlight a little bit about wind generation growth. Typically, in past years, we would see wind generation coming online all through the year. As we head into the 2014, 2015, we've seen quite a decrease in the year-over-year wind generation coming online on a percentage basis. from the boom years of 2008 and 2009 up to last year when we saw less than a 10% footprint increase in the wind generation. And one thing in particular that we looked at there is at the end of the spring season, just this past couple weeks, they announced the completion of the Michigan Thumb Loop, which is potentially only running at 20% of capacity, with the wind farms generation growth in that area completely stalled out by legislation and construction basically halted. So I expect that sort of as that situation hopefully resolves itself in the future through the end of this year and into next year, perhaps some more wind generation coming online in that area. And just a quick look at the capacity on outage as a percentage of real-time generation. We can see that this year's tracked last year very closely thus far. We expect the typical summertime lull in capacity on outage beginning today, sort of the beginning of the official summer season through the end of August, running somewhere between 10 and 15% as we track 2014 very closely.
So this is sort of like the core, I guess, closer to the core of this outlook. We'll be looking at the transmission congestion analysis. We also divided between the classic and also the south because I feel like we realize there has been a lot of focus, attention to the MISO South since the Entergy integration. So we are going to be looking at the MISO Classic first. We had 4 picks pretty much in between June and August. So we've got the MWEX, which is the Minnesota-Wisconsin Export Interface. We've also got the Elk to Magnolia congestion. Following that, we've got the Michigan City to LaPorte, which is also one of the top risks that we see throughout the year. Lastly, we've got the Burnham to Monster / the Monster transformer. So this is sort of like a quick recap. We're going to be diving into each individual constraint for the next 4 slides. First one is the Minnesota to Wisconsin Export Interface. This is actually one of the forecasted congestion risks for our next day. So we are seeing this planned work at Stone Lake to Arrowhead. This is part of the Minnesota to Wisconsin interface line. This is a 345 kV line. Outage will be scheduled to go out for majority of this month. Typically, we see the Minnesota-Wisconsin export interface binding with some outages on the interface in combination of potential generation outage in Wisconsin, and also the strong wind in the MISO North / MISO West will kind of exacerbate this congestion risk. So the impact for this one will be pretty bearish on the Minnesota hub, as indicated by the heat map, also bullish on Wisconsin. Next, we've got the Elk to Magnolia. This is also one of the top hits in the day ahead, also in the real time. There is a line outage at Lakefield to Nobles. This is also on the 345 kV. We're also going to be seeing this line out for quite a long time, for close to 3 months, from July 6th to September 25th. So this is on that border of Minnesota, Iowa. Typically, we see wind aggravating this type of congestion risk. So we've got some bearish and bullish nodes. So it's typically bullish Minnesota hub, and it's also bearish to the George Neal nodes and bullish to the Prairie Island node 1 and node 2. So next, we've got one of the favorite constraints in between the PJM and also the MISO market, Michigan City to LaPorte. We typically see this either with generation weakness in Michigan or some line outages over the NIPSCO border. So this time of the year, we've also seen a pretty long-term outages, a series of long-term outages around the Michigan City. Michigan City to Luchman, Michigan City to Maple will be going out of service to almost 2 months. We've also got some Babcock transformer outages and June Acres to Babcock outages for about 2 weeks or so. So the very typical impact for this is pretty bearish in the NIPSCO, also bullish some of the nodes in Michigan, for example, the Covert and also the Palisade. It's pretty interesting that it's also bullish the PJMC node. This is the last constraint that we liked for the MISO Classic. This is a monster transformer / Ferram's monster. The outages is sort of quite messy. We're seeing some repetitive outages around Schaefer to Tower Road, Schaefer to Burr Oak, Schaefer to Wheatland, which is going to be out for about a month or so. We're also seeing some other outages around MIDO. So this is all over that NIPSCO kind of territory. Typically, the impact is bearish to NIPSCO, the Whiting, and it's also pretty bullish to Indiana Hub, bullish to Bailey Point, PGMC, on DECO Peace Out. So this is also a perfect heat map for that particular congestion. So getting into the MISO South territory, we're also having 4 picks. One of the top risks that we're seeing is the Nelson transformer, which I believe when Jefferson was going over the 2014 summer recap for both the day and the real time, where we're seeing the Nelson transformer as one of the top hits in both the day and the real time. So Nelson, classic example for the South. In addition to the potential generation weakness and demand strain, we're also seeing some of the line work at PPG to Rose Bluff, which is going to be out for about a month or so. Some of the other outages that we typically see binding as congestion will be Nelson Lake Charles, Mossville to Nelson, Carlos to Mossville, and a couple other around the Nelson. So this Nelson transformer will be one of the top congestion risks in the day and the real time for the summer. The bearish point for this is it's bearish to Louisiana, Arkansas hubs, which is a little bit different than the conventional south congestion risk that we see currently. It's also going to be pretty bearish in Nelson Unit 4, Unit 6, and it's bullish to Texas hub. So it's creating some separation between Texas and Lou and Arkansas hubs. It's also bullish the other 2 Nelson nodes, which is quite interesting. So this particular variation does have separation for the 3 hubs in the south and also the separation between the Nelson. Next one, I think we used to see this sometime in the spring. This also is going to be driven by a fairly long-term line outage around Natchez. So this heat map, I guess, is not perfect, but it typically is not driving any separation between hubs. It's driving separation between nodes. So what we found previously when it was binding, it was bearish to the Vidalia node. As you can see, the purple point will be Vidalia. It's also slightly bullish on the Grand Gulf. So this heat map is sort of, it's in the central Louisiana and in between Louisiana and Mississippi. The third one we figured is they also used to bind a lot in the summer. Didn't really appear on the top list over the spring 2014, but we did see this a lot during the previous summer, is the Quatorta Raceland. So there's a line outage which is pretty much going to be out for the whole month of July. This is the Ashland to Houma. So this is around the Lipa, which is in the southern tip of Louisiana, sort of close to the New Orleans territory. We will be seeing this one. I guess we used to see this one quite often in the real time. Some of the interesting thought was generation weakness over the Lipa, also the tip of New Orleans will tend to aggravate this type of congestion risk. So the impact for this particular constraint is going to be bearish 9 Mile, bearish Little Gypsy, and it's also really bullish the Lipa and Lipa Houma. So I think this will kind of wrap up our last pick for the south, Coffin to Manwa. We saw this also in the spring. I think in the coming summer, we're seeing some longer-term outages around Coffin to Shady Oaks. I believe it's going to be out for the month of June and July. Also, on the side, we've got some outages around the West Fork, which is going to be out for about 2 weeks or so. So this will be creating some separation between central Louisiana and southern Louisiana. Is extremely bearish to central Louisiana and bullish the southern tip of Louisiana, and it also appears to be bullish to Texas hub. So this is the other one that we liked, which will kind of wrap up our stock picks for the day and also for the summer. So we've got a question coming along. How does Paria Island impact the MWEX congestion? I think this is also the question arise during the next day report. I think with that Paria Island, one of the unit offline, it tripped offline yesterday. There is limited generation to the source of the Minnesota, so that will definitely help alleviate a lot of the MWEX/Minnesota-Wisconsin export interface congestion. But hopefully this Paria Island nuke will recover sometime soon, maybe by the end of the week, and that will kind of reduce that a little. But typically without any generation outages to the source side, we will be liking the MWEX congestion, especially in combination of any strong wind days. So I think that's all for the congestion transmission section. Let's get into some of the new work, which there's not a whole lot of things going on for the summer. We noticed that there is some upgrade for the transformer over the RS Nelson. So this kind of coincides with that Nelson transformer congestion risk that we called for the summer. With this upgrade from 260 to 1200, hopefully we will be seeing Nelson transformer being a little bit more quiet in the real time, but it doesn't eliminate that congestion from binding at all. Next one, the Baldwin transformer. We're also seeing some upgrade on that particular equipment. We might be seeing, typically we see the Baldwin transformer jumping in here and now. It's not on the transmission analysis pick, but we typically see that binding either with generation strength over St. Louis at the other coal-fired plants. That will typically help alleviate that congestion a little bit. But that's definitely not something that we really would pay a lot of attention to for the summer. The last one, we will be also seeing some upgrades around the Colby to Emory. That's typically around the Lime Creek to Emory area, which has been quite active with some of the wind-driven wind in the north region. So that will hopefully alleviate that little, but probably not eliminate it at all from the real time. So that will be answering that new equipment or new upgrades for the summer. I think lastly, we will be touching a little bit on the Rockies Express pipeline reversal. So I don't think this is any news, but this was originally built in 2008, and it was intended to move gas eastward to Midwest and Appalachian markets. I think based on the much cheaper gas available over the Marcellus and Utica, we have been seeing the reverse going on. We're seeing gas moving from east to west. There has been lots of gas moving from east to west. I believe last year, June 2014, we were seeing gas moving from the east-west, from southern Ohio into central Indiana with the ANR pipeline, and it could potentially flow into Michigan as a result. Believe this reversal will be done sometime either by Q3, where I don't think it's going to be fully completed by the summer, but hopefully sometime by the fall we might be seeing fully completion of this reversal. Should that happen, I think that will kind of give us a little bit more expansion for this east to west type of movement, and also we will be hopefully storing additional gas in the Midwest market. But just for now, we at least don't anticipate to see any significant changes for the gas demand, especially in the Chicago Midwest market. So this is just something to watch out or something on the radar, but I don't anticipate to see any dramatic changes for the gas for the summer. Just an interesting fact that will probably happen sometime in the next couple of months. So that should be able to summarize it all for us for the summer. Just a quick summary of what we went over. This summer, 2015, we will be seeing above normal temperatures across the footprint, especially across the Little Rock, Indianapolis, and St. Louis. The forecasted summer peak provided by NERC is 127.3 gig, and we're also seeing MISO is pretty optimistic to bring enough generation to meet that number. Also, we are not seeing any major generation changes for the summer, just some small wind farms in Michigan. The capacity outage number is expected to drop into the 15% of the total fuel mix. So we should not be seeing anything being planned out. It might just be some unplanned work as we go along the month. Congestion pattern for the summer, we are still seeing some bullish Indiana congestion risk. For example, the Michigan City to LaPorte, the Burham's monster transformer, but I believe the majority of that focus kind of lies over the MISO South. Particularly, we will be expecting to see a slightly more expensive Texas hub and Louisiana hub. And lastly, the Rockies Express pipeline reversal has no significant impact on the gas demand. Not anytime soon, likely going to be going on happening over this fall 2015. Just overall, this is going to be a slightly warmer summer, but I think we're still under control. So this will be it. Thanks everybody for your patience. We will also be kind of collecting some questions, and then we'll be right back.
Okay, so I'm going to answer a question here. I'll read the question off first. Your forecast for peak load is higher than last year. What is the breakdown of South with a non-South MISO? Is it just that non-South MISO load is higher than last year, or South as well? So the way I understand this is, let's say we don't have South, and we're just comparing North and Central. If you compare last summer with this summer, just looking at North and Central, I would expect stronger year-over-year demand. And the reason being, we do have the strongest heat focused right across Central, St. Louis and Indianapolis in particular, and that's why if you just looked at North and Central, we would expect stronger demand year-over-year.
Okay, so we'll go over another couple questions and we'll be right back.
Okay, yep, and I'm going to answer another question here. I'll read it off real quickly for you. Okay, so ECMWF, which is a computer model, and WSI are both calling for a cooler than normal summer. Is your forecast made in-house, or do you use a third party? Ours is made in-house. We have our own proprietary forecasting technique that we use, so we do not use any vendors. We generate our own forecasts.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that we got for the day. So thanks everybody for your participation. We've got a lot of interesting questions. Just for other people who might be wondering, we will be sending out the summer outlook in PDF format. We'll also be, the audio will also be available on the Genscape site, which will also be sent out as the emails to whoever registered for the outlook. So thanks again, everybody. I guess we will be seeing you again at the fall outlook. Have a great day.